The NBA season officially begins tonight. Timberwolves, Lakers in LA. We'll preview the game on this Locked On Wolves, Locked On Lakers crossover episode coming up next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Lakers and Locked On Wolves your first listens, depending on who I'm talking to, who's watching, who's listening. And no matter where you get your podcast, these ones are always free. They're never behind a paywall. Locked On Lakers and Locked On Wolves, also both available on YouTube, where you can hang out with awesome communities of Lakers and Wolves fans active in the comments section. We at Locked On Lakers often use feedback from our audience as talking points. I'm sure Ben Beecken from Locked On Wolves does the same. Subscribe to the audio and video channels for Locked On Lakers and Locked On Wolves. I'm Andy Kamenetsky, co-host of Locked On Lakers, joined by Ben Beecken from Locked On Wolves. And Ben, this is a really big game tonight, kicking off what I think everyone seems to agree is going to be a brutally hard season for any team battling in the Western Conference.
Yeah, I mean, like it's any team basically. I don't know. Everybody except what, like Portland is gonna feel like they've got a shot.
No, Utah's gonna come around.
Yeah. That's true. But yeah, I mean, like it just magnifies. It just magnifies every game. The West is going to be so brutal. I mean, like we can get into this maybe a little bit, but like just how compressed the win totals are going to be, and it feels like every game is ultimately going to matter for tiebreakers or whatever purpose when the season comes down to it.
It's funny. Like last season, the Lakers won 47 games. I think with some better decisions, could have been a 50-win team, and you win 50 games, as you understand, there's a lot of optimism heading into your season. Like there's something psychologically different about a 5 in front of your win total as opposed to a 4. But the Lakers have these questions that center around a truly brand new coach in JJ Redick. And the Wolves have a truly new and different team, which is where we're going to begin. The Karl-Anthony Towns trade, sending them the Knicks, took a lot of people by surprise. Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo are now part of the Wolves. We're going to talk about what the new guys bring to the table in a bit, but just when you think about Cat's absence, like I know he's had ups and downs with Minnesota, but like looking through the all-time records for this franchise, Kevin Garnett is basically number one for everything, but Cat is number 2 in a lot, and KG is obviously the GOAT Wolf, but Karl-Anthony Towns might be the GOAT runner-up. He's a big presence in franchise lore. From both a cultural and on-court perspective, what do you think it means for him to no longer be with this team? That's
a great way to phrase that, because I think like my immediate reaction from a basketball standpoint is the ceiling of this team is lower, and I've certainly analyzed this in a number of different ways over the last 2 weeks, and there's a world in which they win more games this year, absolutely, but I just think the most likely best case where the ceiling of this team is a little bit lower without Karl-Anthony Towns, and that doesn't include some of the off-court stuff, and by all accounts they handled this the right way, and you know, Cat is a great dude, and apparently Tim Connolly went and talked to Cat in person about 5 minutes before the news broke, like went and saw him at his place and like had the conversation, and Cat was, you know, did great stuff in the community even up until the day after he was traded, and like that cultural piece is interesting because clearly over the last couple of years there was a shift in who's the alpha on the court, and it became Anthony Edwards, and Cat did all the right things. He said, not only said all the right things, he did do all the right things on and off the court. There was never any sort of angst between Ant and Cat. And now that guy's gone, and you're bringing in somebody in Julius Randle who, like, he's not like known for having off the court issues or anything like that, but it's a bit of a different mentality than what Karl-Anthony Towns has. And so there could be that shift. And I think there's the danger. I would put it almost on equal footing as you know, what happens on the court with the actual X's and O's piece of this. How does and I think it's related, honestly, that the Randle and Ant dynamic work on the court specifically because, you know, from a basketball standpoint, there's going to be less space. That's the obvious one, right? Like Randle and Ant both like to operate kind of in the middle of the floor. And what's that going to look like? Randle's nowhere near the shooter that Cat is. But then that spill over into the off the court, the overall mentality of the team. If the two who are supposed to be the two best players, or at least the two top offensive options, if those guys don't see eye to eye and there is a learning curve there, it's very rare that a team that went to the conference finals, that was one of the last really 3 teams playing in the NBA last year, trades their second best player on the eve of training camp. You could say the same thing about the Knicks, a team that's a finals hopeful with the Knicks also trading their second best player on the eve of training camp. So I think both are legitimate concerns, I think is probably the right word. But I don't know that functionally, the team shouldn't be significantly worse. I don't think they're significantly better. It's just, can they work through some of these things? Is the culture that Tim Connolly and Chris Finch has instilled, is that strong enough to kind of get past any potential issues here? And that, that obviously remains to be seen. They only played one preseason game with Randall. He's still recovering from the shoulder surgery. So there's a lot that still has to be, kind of hashed out here in the coming weeks.
Yeah, and Randall has a potential player option that he can opt out of. So this could be thought of for him as a contract year. So he's got career concerns. He's got some of his own agenda, for lack of a better way of putting it, which doesn't necessarily mean he'll separate himself from the team. If, for what it's worth, when I covered Randall when he was with the Lakers, I really liked him a lot. And, he's an extremely hard worker. He plays very hard, and, there could be elements of physicality that he brings to this team that at the very least, I don't think you get with Karl-Anthony Towns. Yeah. And it's funny with Randall, he and Cat are in a lot of ways, they're both very talented, but they are like polar opposite players, both in what they do. But, some of Randall's strengths, for example, I feel like he could potentially find ways to create easier shots for Anthony Edwards better than Cat could. He's much more of an off the dribble threat. He's much more of a drive and kick guy. Randall does often look for his own shot, and the ball can stop with him, but he might be able to do some stuff setting up Ant better. But with that in mind, how much utility do you feel like Ant has off the ball? Because Randall's, I think, is limited.
Yeah, Ant's actually a really good catch and shoot 3-point shooter. And I think even Chris Finch said something during training camp to the media about how that's an opportunity for them that they've kind of highlighted, that hey, Ant catch and shoot opportunities need to go up. He was 44% catch and shoot threes last year, really good. He just didn't have that many opportunities because Cat's not the best passer off the dribble, and nobody else was really creating offense for this team. Mike Conley's not driving and dishing at age 37. And so it was Ant creating for himself or potentially in transition. And that's an area, you're right. I think if Julius Randle's creating off the dribble, Randle's a superior passer to Cat in almost every way. And so there is potential there. I think I just wonder how much of the offense, when they're both on the floor together, will actually run through Randall. And that to me is the biggest offensive question mark, is do they do that because Ant's more valuable off the ball than Randall? Or do they tell Julius Randle, hey, go stand in the corner while Ant's operating, and then maybe if Rudy's off the floor, if Naz Reid's in the front court with Randall, maybe they play Randall in the dunker spot a little bit, and he's done that a little bit in his career, and you put Naz on the perimeter, you play 4 out. So there's a lot of different options here, but you're right, Ant off the ball provides more value. It's just, how much are you willing to live with the multiple jab steps and the ball stopping with Randall and Chris Finch? It hates mid-range jumpers as much as any analytically minded head coach does. And so how is that going to play? Now, Randall's obviously not the same. There's a good way and a bad way to get those shots off, and Randall's pretty effective when he gets into the paint, especially. But if the ball stopping becomes an issue, what's the answer there? I actually think the way he'll be most effective will be as basically one of Randall or Ant will always be on the floor. I think staggering their minutes, obviously they're both going to start, but staggering their minutes so that if Ant's off the floor, you tell Julius Randle, hey, it's your show. You go score, go be a 1A guy right now. And then when they're on the floor together, that's when you got to kind of, what's the right flow of the offense.
You mentioned that Julius Randle's played 1 game with the Wolves in the preseason coming up. I want to get your impressions of what that looked like. We can get into some of the matchups that we think could be interesting on this opening night. And you can pepper me, Ben, with whatever you want about the Lakers. That's all coming up next. Locked On Lakers and Locked On Wolves brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can enjoy this season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So let's just say you're watching a game and it feels like you can anticipate every single play before it happens. every big touchdown pass, every big turnover, every big sack, busted run, whatever. It feels like you've got a second sense for everything. You can confirm those hunches with the latest stats, live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you would place your bets with FanDuel. And you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And NBA season kicks off today. Our friends at FanDuel, options for you as of this recording. The Thunder are 3-1 favorites to win the Western Conference, going through some of the other contenders, perhaps. The Wolves, Mavs, and Nuggets all tied at 5-1. The Grizzlies 16-1, Lakers 19-1, Warriors 21-1, and Pelicans and Kings tied at 22-1. That's FanDuel.com. All right, so as we mentioned before, there is one game in the books for the Wolves in the preseason. Reminder, this episode brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. How did it look for the Wolves with Randall on the court? And was it a game that Ant was out there with him as well?
Yeah, they played quite a bit together, and it was almost exactly what I expected, which was, and maybe a little bit better overall. Initially, it was clunky. Like, there was even a possession where Ant threw the ball to Julius at like the top of the circle, and Randall was thinking, I'm going to throw it back to Ant and get out of the way and let him cook. And Ant cut after he passed it, thinking, I'm going to let Randall, go to work, and the ball flew out of bounds. And there was kind of this like, okay, this is weird because they both were trying to be unselfish here. And then it ended up being like exactly what you'd expect, which was Randall got to showcase his passing a little bit. Ant had a couple of dump offs with Randall in the dunker. I think one in the dunker and one as a cutter, where Ant dumped the ball off to Randall for a layup or a dunk. We got to see a little bit of Randall in transition, which is another area that I think he could be really effective, where Cat was kind of spotty in transition. And the Wolves didn't run enough last year. They were dead last in running off of defensive rebounds. And Randall's a rip the rebound and go type of a guy.
Yeah.
So we saw a little bit of that. I think that's going to be super helpful. Chris Finch is excited about that. It actually ended up exactly what you'd kind of want it to be. And I think they each played 25, 28 minutes and the majority of that together. So yeah, I mean, I think it was better than I expected it to be. Like, it seemed like they got to this point where it was like, they were really playing off of each other. And I don't know what that looks like when there's a little bit more structure and you're dealing more with scouting reports and matchups in the regular season. And what you want to avoid, obviously, is the my turn, your turn stuff, which we saw a lot of early with Cat and Ant, where it was literally like one guy would use 4 possessions in a row and the other guy would just stand and watch. And they got away from that mostly last year. But I do think that because they're both good passers and because they can both score in traffic and get to the free throw line, as long as they're not operating in the same space, and of course, Rudy Gobert complicates that a little bit, it can work pretty well. And I think you mentioned already, the catch and shoot threat will be huge too, because Randall's such a good passer that as long as he knows, like, hey, everybody except Rudy Gobert on this team can knock down threes. The Wolves are actually number 1 in the league last year in 3-point percentage as a team. Like, Mike Conley's like 43%. Like, Randall's going to have more options and Dante DiVincenzo, who Randall played with. Like, there's plenty of options for catch and shoot if Randall's, penetrating and kicking. So I was encouraged by the way that the first, the only preseason game we got to see the two of them together, with the way that went. I was definitely encouraged.
Yeah, you mentioned that Dante piece, and he's overlooked, I think, in certain ways, because Cat and Julius are both more accomplished players and bigger name players, but Dante DiVincenzo arguably had his career best year last year with the Knicks, was hitting threes at a very high clip, at very high volume. I think he gives a little bit more of that playmaking that the Wolves may have needed last season. But like, at the end of the day, the team's going to go as far as Ant, I think, can ascend, as opposed to necessarily carry them. But last year, second team All NBA, part of the Team USA run. How ready do you think he is in terms of just putting a team on his back and, dictating whatever is left to create of culture? Because I would assume, at least, Cat was a big part of that, just from having that seniority and that tenure, and the guy who'd been there the longest. He's no longer there. I would guess Ant is now the longest tenured Wolf, or close.
Yeah. Yep.
How ready do you think he is to truly have this be his team, like on the court, in the locker room, all that?
Yeah. I think Naz Reid is maybe a year
Okay.
before. I think 1 year. It's close though. Ant and McDaniels were the same draft, so those two, and then I think Naz would be 1 year prior. I think he's about there. I think it's a good thing they still have Mike Conley. It's a really good thing they extended him last year. He's got 2 more years on his deal. We'll see if he. I mean, he was looking pretty worn down at the end of the year last year, but I think he's a great influence on Ant. And I think Gobert, honestly, too. And I know that there's plenty of opinions out there about Gobert in the locker room by current and former players, but I think it's yeah. Spent more time talking about that on the show this offseason than I anticipated, actually. But yeah, I think he's about there. And I mean, through a round and a half last year, through 2 rounds last year in the playoffs, I mean, everybody would have said like, all right, he's there. I mean, like we ran the gamut of he's Michael Jordan to like, hold up, is he even that good? Like that happened very quickly. He ran out of gas in the conference finals. And I don't think it was like, it got to the point where there were those questions because he was passing up opportunities. He looked like he didn't want the moment, but I think he was just completely dead tired. We saw in the summer, you mentioned the Olympics, like he wanted the moment there when he was more of a, bench heat check type guy for Team USA, but like he doesn't want to shy away from the moment. He does want to carry the team. I just think he didn't have a full understanding, and he wasn't the only one, of like what this takes to get to the finals and win the finals, and just literally ran out of gas. Tough matchup against the Mavs, and Luka played out of his mind. I think he's about there, though. It's incredible to say about a guy who's 23. But like with some of those veteran guardrails, and you lose one of them in Cat, and Cat is Cat, but he was still a steadying presence because he'd been there so long, and him and Ant were friends. But like with Rudy and Conley kind of helping along, and then you add in, DiVincenzo, I would say, and Randall, and like you lose Kyle Anderson, but there's still enough. Joe Ingles is now in the fold, so you've still got that like mix of a couple really old guys with Conley and Ingles, and Rudy's kind of in the middle, and then a couple really young guys. I think Ant's about there, and I think Chris Finch is the perfect coach for him because he's laid back and the players love him, but he also will call it like it is, and he's not afraid to call out a player, whether it's even in the media if somebody needs to be better. I mean, he had some pretty pointed comments about Rob Dillingham's preseason the other day and said, look, he's got to be better in these areas, and I think it's the perfect type of coach for Ant too, and I think I don't know. I feel good about him as a leader. I just think it's in his own way, but that's not a concern. I don't think, headed into this year. I think he's about ready to get this team at least back to the conference finals and hopefully make another step.
Yeah, and thinking about the matchups for tonight, one of the big ones that is really intriguing to me, and it might feel self-evident and kind of, well, duh, but who guards Ant for the Lakers? Because with Jared Vanderbilt hurt, that's your first choice in a perfect world off the table. And, Ant is too big and strong for Austin Reeves. He's too big and fast for Rui Hachimura. And it's not ideal to have LeBron be the primary guy on a scorer like Ant, like crunch time, sure, but as the main defender, it's not what you'd want for LeBron entering. You might have heard, Ben, he's turning 40 this year. I don't know if it reached your neck of the woods, but it's been talked about a lot here. They may have no choice for it. I think Rui is a much better cover for Randall. And maybe this is in part why LeBron was given the last 2 preseason games off. Like they may anticipate the idea that right out of the gate, LeBron's going to have this assignment covering Ant. And they just want to make sure like you get a week's worth of rest and your legs back under you before you take that on. What's a matchup that you find pretty intriguing about tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you about on the flip side, the Anthony Davis piece, because Cat was the easy answer for the most part regarding Anthony Davis. I mean, it is interesting when you look at this, and teams are so willing to cross match nowadays that like it is kind of a puzzle. Like, and for a team with Rudy Gobert, I mean, a lot of times teams will do exactly what you suggested, which is basically leave a smaller guy on him and try and just deny a lob as much as you can and live with whatever happens. I mean, he's actually improved as a free throw shooter enough last year that like Hacker Rudy wasn't really a thing. And so there's some danger there, certainly, because I mean, like the Wolves are happy to toss him the ball if he's wide open. But I mean, that's interesting. Who guards Ant? I think LeBron guarding Ant would be fascinating. I would think Hachimura would have a shot. I can't remember who typically guarded him last year. I think at times it was Taurean Prince, at times Vanderbilt when he was healthy. That would be interesting. Yeah, the most interesting thing is who's going to guard Ant, and then on the flip side, in my mind, who's guarding Anthony Davis? Is it Julius Randle? I don't know what kind of history they have, guarding each other at all or not. But I guess turning it around from the Lakers side, like who is there a matchup that you'd be concerned about for like, or somebody you'd want to guard Anthony Davis, or a plan you think that the Lakers might have coming into the game offensively against, the Wolves were an incredible defensive team last year, and Jaden McDaniels is their best perimeter defender, but I don't think the plan is to put Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Davis, at least not if you don't want him to get into foul trouble right away.
This is what makes the Lakers, at least offensively, a potential problem for a lot of teams around the league. There's no, you don't need to worry about him guy in the Lakers' first five. Like all five of them are dynamic scoring options, and there's nobody that you can ignore. And given how, Anthony Davis has been putting up more threes in this preseason than he ever has, but I still consider him more of a threat around the rim than behind the arc. But the other four guys are all guys that operate in space. So there's nobody for Rudy to ignore in that way, if that was the type of thing that you were looking to do. So my expectation would be that Rudy Gobert guards AD, and that Julius Randle, Jalen McDaniels, those are the guys going checking LeBron and Rui. And I'm anticipating very little cross matching, at least from Minnesota's defensive perspective, but we shall see. And speaking of we shall see, Ben, what questions you have about the Lakers. That's coming up next. Locked On Lakers and Locked On Wolves are brought to you by BetterHelp. October's the month where we celebrate wearing masks and costumes, but some of us feel like we are wearing a mask more often than we want to, at work, social settings, around our family. Therapy can help you find different ways to accept all parts of yourself, so you can take off the mask, because masks are for Halloween fun, not for our emotions. Spooky season should not feel like a year-round event. And I can personally attest to how much therapy helped me and my family during a really difficult period, learning the best ways to communicate, make compromises without feeling unsatisfied or unheard. Just learn to think beyond your own perspective and to become the best version of yourself, and not just for yourself, but for the people in your life. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Take off the mask with BetterHelp. That's BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. So what do you want to know, Ben, when it comes to this Lakers squad, the JJ Redick era of the Lakers, the Bronny era of the Lakers? What do you want to know?
So I guess think like a little bit bigger picture, kind of zooming out a little bit, looking at the Western Conference this offseason. Obviously, some teams got a lot better. A couple of teams got much worse, look at the Clippers and stuff, but there are other teams that didn't really change much. And the Lakers are the one that probably stayed the most similar in terms of their roster. Obviously the coaching change we can talk about too, but from a Lakers perspective, what's the hope for this team improving this year? Why would this team be better? And you said they made some bad decisions last year. Maybe coaching is the answer, that, that going from 47 to 50 plus wins, but what's the best case scenario in terms of this team progressing from last season to this season? And what does that look like?
Well, a big piece of it, honestly, would be JJ Redick. If you believe in his potential as a coach and his ability to, outpace his lack of experience, because he truly has never done this before at any level, or just you thought some of Darvin Ham's decisions last year were so inexplicable, and there were some that frankly were, and Darvin ultimately lost the locker room over them. It's not even that players didn't like some of what he was doing. They flat out didn't understand it. And I think that's really the point where, as a coach, you're done when the players don't get what you're doing. You can look back last year at, a handful of wins, or a handful of situations where it felt like better, more understandable coaching could have gotten the Lakers a handful more wins. And then all of a sudden, again, you're talking about a 50-win team. You're talking about a team that doesn't end up facing Denver in the first round. Maybe they go a round or two in the playoffs, and you feel differently about them. There's more optimism heading into the offseason and into this season. So I guess whether you think JJ Redick is that good of a coach out of the gate or just that able to avoid some of the things that Darvin didn't, that could lead to the Lakers being a better team this year. There's obviously the hope that and necessity that LeBron and Anthony Davis stay healthy and the pieces around them. Dalton Connect as a rookie off the bench could potentially provide them some bench scoring that last year was just absent from the team once Rui Hachimura got put into the starting lineup, which was the correct idea. Like the Lakers became a much better team once he entered that unit, but the price that was paid was the bench scoring was pretty non-existent. And Dalton Connect, there's going to be some growing pains like there are with any rookie, and he will get targeted defensively, but the guy can score. He put up 35 in a preseason game, and some of the shots that he made were really difficult. Like he can score at the NBA level. And I think that's going to be a potential factor. And also, and this is the I don't know if it's going to happen factor, but something that I know the Lakers, for better or for worse, are counting on, is that Austin Reeves is going to take another step in his development, because this team was very much designed with the idea of Austin Reeves becoming a legitimate third best player on a championship caliber team, a type of team that can go multiple rounds in the playoffs. I think Austin is a good player. I don't think he's at that level yet. And the problem for this team is they've, I think, held off on potential opportunities and trades that maybe could have made them better because they wanted to keep Reeves. But also, too, if it's not him, I don't know who it's going to be. Like D'Angelo Russell, I think is a good player. He's very polarizing. I'm sure there are a lot of Wolves fans watching this right now with very strong, likely negative opinions about D'Lo. But I think on balance last year, he had a better regular season than Reeves. Reeves was better than him in the playoffs. But no matter who you think is the better of the two, the problem is neither one of them, I think, is as good as this team needs them to be. And again, the Lakers are really investing in the idea that it's Reeves. They're starting to give him more on-ball opportunities, more of a direct usage in the offense. I'm not sure it actually plays to his strengths. We'll see how it goes. But if the Lakers do outperform last year, one facet I think the Lakers as a front office are hoping for or counting on is that Reeves will take that next step.
Yeah, and sitting here from the outside looking in, like that feels like a pretty fair assessment of, there's obviously a clear top two players, and at this stage it still feels like Davis and LeBron are both good enough to be the top two players on a championship caliber team, but then there seems to be a drop off before that number three player, and Reeves at this point has more upside than somebody like a D'Lo, and maybe Connect can get there someday. But the question is who can step up and be that third guy, I guess. So like bridging the gap between the Redick piece of what you just talked about and this matchup against the Wolves, Minnesota was the best defense in the league last year. It wasn't close. They were, I think, the second best or the second biggest gap between the number one defense and the number two defense in the last 30 years. There was like a Spurs team 8 years ago or something that had a bigger gap, and that was it. Wow. What does the Lakers, for, I guess, bigger picture wise, what kind of influence do you think Redick will have offensively for the Lakers, and how will the Lakers offense change? And then what does that mean for how they would attack the Wolves, which, Minnesota's got two. Jaden McDaniels is a second team all defensive player on the perimeter. Rudy Gobert is reigning defensive player of the year. Ant is a plus perimeter defender. What's the plan look like for how the Lakers would go about attacking the Wolves, and perhaps what influence would Redick have on that, both in this game and then bigger picture, which maybe is tough to answer before seeing him coach at a regular season game. But I guess what's the anticipation there for the Lakers offense?
Ben, I need to quickly correct you. You said that Rudy Gobert is the reigning defensive player of the year. You needed to say the reigning defensive player of the year at Anthony Davis's expense. That's what
he finished third in voting, or third, right? Or second?
No, he finished, I believe, fourth.
Oh, was he really?
He was not one of the top three. Wow. He did make all defense first team.
Okay.
And he certainly outplayed Rudy Gobert in the Olympics, but that we won't get sidetracked.
I would have heard an argument about Anthony Davis for defensive player of the year. I think that's more than some of the other candidates.
I think Anthony Davis has a legitimate gripe when he says he doesn't feel like he gets enough respect around the league for what he does defensively. As far as what the Lakers would look to attack that Wolves D, that I didn't know that stat. Like, I knew last year their defense was good. I didn't realize it was that good. They're definitely looking to add, first of all, more 3-point shooting. Like last year, the Lakers were kind of quietly a top 10 team in terms of 3-point percentage in the league. They actually were hitting at a very good clip, but they were 28th, I believe, or 27th in attempts, which makes no sense. And I think it left a lot of points on the table, even with a really good offense. And that's something Redick is looking to increase a lot. So far in the preseason, the results have been pretty spotty, but I think some of that is them just unlearning their previous habits of not taking these threes and, I think seeking them out a little bit more than they would once they're used to things and they get a little bit more judicious with it. The other thing that Redick is looking to implement is just more motion in general. He is, you're still going to see pick and roll. It's LeBron, it's Anthony Davis. Like, you don't get away from those things altogether. But at the same time, JJ Redick has really emphasized the idea of we don't want guys standing around. Like, we want to keep guys in continual motion. There's been a lot more flow and a lot more creativity to the offense, even at times when it hasn't always looked that efficient or even pretty. Like there have been times where it's felt to me like guys are rushing to their spots, rushing to get certain shots. Like, you can tell they're still working through stuff. And then especially in the preseason when LeBron has missed a few games, like his control over the offense is always going to be a thing that can't be replicated and can't be faked. So it's going to look different. But were I to guess, the way I'd answer your question, Ben, is I think he wants to make it so there's more for the Wolves to keep track of defensively, like more off-ball movement, like more heads on a swivel, like where you can't just key in defensively and just sort of watch one or two players and you have a general idea of what's happening. Just make sure you don't sag off too much defensively and leave a guy open in the corner for a kick out. Like that there's going to be actual movement required defensively because there's all this movement that's going on offensively, and that you might be able to, confuse even a team like Minnesota just by giving them more to keep track of. That would be the guess.
And that's the Wolves' biggest blind spot, I guess, would be off ball. Some of that stuff. Ant can get a little lazy off ball, and I think Julius Randle's had those same issues. And so some of that getting lost in the wash, if teams actually do, it's a lot harder to guard versus just playing straight isolation, against basically anybody. Luka Doncic is like the only guy that they couldn't guard in space last year. Otherwise, they're pretty well set up with perimeter defenders and Rudy Gobert at the rim. So last question, going back to way big picture question, but for Wolves fans especially, what do you think is what's your big picture prediction for the Lakers this year? Do you think realistically it's a get out of the play-in type year for the Lakers, or is it going to be a similar outcome next, or as it was last year, or what do you think about the overall season result for LA?
I think if guys stay healthy this year and they are able to, in a lot of ways, this is a LeBron question. In a perfect world, you would look to try to ease someone like LeBron and maybe even to a certain extent AD through a season, just to try to have them as great as they can be in the playoffs. But I think the West is too difficult. You mentioned getting out of the play-in. I think top 6 should be their baseline goal for the season. Just avoid that play-in altogether. Avoid the mad sprint that they've had the last 2 years where they've, post All-Star break, they're one of the best teams in the league, but that's in part because they have no choice other than to be one of the best teams in the league if they want to make the playoffs or just make the play-in to have the opportunity to get to the playoffs. So I feel like top 6 seed should be the baseline minimum goal. They're not going to put their foot to the pedal and try to get a number 1 overall seed. I don't even know if they're capable of it, but I think that would be an unwise goal to begin with. But there is a certain amount of energy and intensity and urgency that this team that often hasn't exhibited, it's kind of a franchise thing too. It's always, the regular season doesn't matter. It's all about the playoffs. The reality is the regular season sets you up for the playoffs. And I think they're going to have to treat the season with more urgency. But I also feel like JJ Redick has really been emphasizing that it's been a more urgent preseason than I've seen in quite a while. So I'm hoping that is a precursor of things to come. Last question, who wins tonight?
Actually, I saw that on FanDuel. It's actually Wolves are only favored by 1.5, which surprised me a little bit. It wouldn't surprise me if the Lakers win. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that or not, but I actually kind of think the Lakers might win this game, and then the Wolves, they have the Kings 2 nights later. Maybe they have a response against the Kings on Thursday.
I think the Lakers are going to be able to take a bit of advantage of the Wolves. Both teams are figuring things out, but I think the Wolves may be further behind the curve just because their trade happened more recently than JJ Redick taking over. Going Lakers, but I think it's going to be a really fun, competitive game. Looking forward to an entire season and talking with you more across the year, Ben. Thank you very much for the time. This was fun. Both shows will be back on Wednesday, and happy NBA season to all who celebrate.